The night is as dark as ink, and the wooden houses in the surrounding village are shaking slightly in the cold wind, as if they will be swallowed by the darkness in the side at any time. Lin Yechen sat next to the broken wooden table in his house, holding a raw iron blade in his hand, looking out the window with empty eyes. He was just 18 and had already become accustomed to this lonely night. Everyone in the village said that he was a freak, his parents were gone for a long time, and there was no one else in the family, only a strange energy that was unknown and the strange starlight that would occasionally flash through the eyes. "Yechen, are you in a daze again?" The door was pushed open with a squeak, and Yi Shuanghua walked in, and the blue-white robe reflected a cold light under the dim light. She was carrying a basket of just-baked bread in her hand, and the fragrance filled the simplicity of the hut. Her long hair was draped over her shoulders, like a waterfall under the moonlight, with a delicate and gentle face on her face, but there was something hidden in her eyes that made it impossible for people to see through. Lin Yechen returned to his senses and smiled hard. "It's nothing, it's just. I feel like this day is too frustrating. I just chop wood and train swords every day, and I can't find any opponent like that." He looked down at the iron sword in his hand. The sword was full of gaps, as if it would break into two pieces at any time. There was actually one sentence in his mind that he didn't think he should belong here, but he couldn't tell why. Yi Shuanghua put the bread on the table, sat opposite him, and said lightly, "You have to bear it. The outside of the village is not a good place. Have you forgotten what the elder said? People from the Dark Empire came to catch people, especially those like you." She decided not to say the second half, but Lin Yechen knew what she wanted to say. A freak like him, with inexplicable blood on her body, and might be caught as a slave at any time, or worse. He curled his lips and didn't care. "If you catch it, grab it. Anyway, there is nothing to keep in my life." But after saying this, his heart was inexplicably tightened, as if an invisible string was being slammed. He lowered his head and took a bite of the bread. The hard texture made him raise his eyebrows and didn't say anything more. Yi Shuanghua looked at him, and a flickered in his eyes, but it quickly covered it. She stood up, walked to the window, looked at the dark forest outside, and said lightly, "The weather was a little uneven tonight, and the dogs in the village were barking. Don't run away, listen to the old man, and stay at home." Lin Yechen praised his voice but did not answer. He knew that Yi Shuanghua was for his own good, but he always felt a sense of anxiety in his heart, as if there was a fire burning, and he couldn't find the exit. He stood up, inserted the iron blade back into the broken blade sheath at his waist, and said, "I'm so frustrated when I go to the yard to practice the drama." Yi Shuanghua opened her mouth and wanted to say something, but finally she sighed and pointed, "Don't be too late, I have to help the elder repair the ward tomorrow." Lin Yechen didn't turn around, but just snatched his hand, pushed the door and walked out. The night wind was biting, shaved his face like a knife, but he felt comfortable, at least much better than the pressure atmosphere in the room. He pulled out the iron sword and swept it casually for a few seconds. The wind brought a dust of sand, but he didn't feel any sense of accomplishment in his heart. This kind of broken sword cannot be cut down even by trees, let alone who to protect. At this moment, a low growl suddenly came from the forest far away, like a wilderness, or something more terrifying. Lin Yechen suddenly stopped moving, held the handle tightly, staring at the black-pressed tree shadow. The forest on the edge of the village has never been safe, and occasionally a demon will come out, but this sound, he has never heard of it. "Who is there?" He sniffed softly, with a few tight spots in the sound, but he was more curious. He walked forward a few steps, and the withered leaves under his feet emitted a crisp sound, and an inexplicable fishy atmosphere was still scattered in the night wind, which made his heart beat faster. Suddenly, a blue light lit up from behind him, and then a cold breath came over his face. Lin Yechen suddenly turned around, only to see that Yi Shuanghua was standing behind him, with a group of frost lying in his palm, and his face was as cold as ice. "Didn't I say don't run around?" There is a silence in the forest. "Old man has already asked someone to check it out, go back." Lin Yechen curled his lips and wanted to retaliate, but he had no words yet. A sharp scream suddenly broke out from the forest far away, followed by a firestorm, as if the entire village was ignited. When he and Yi Shuanghua looked at each other, their faces changed. It's the entrance of the village. Yi Shuanghua bit his teeth and the frost light in his hand became brighter. Go back and get something, maybe it's a group of demons. Lin Yechen didn't think much about it, and turned around and rushed into the room, but he felt in his heart that this was not as simple as a demon. He grabbed the rag bag on the table, which contained several dry rice and a small bottle of water, stuffed it into it with his hands, then took the shattered sword and pulled it out. The village was already in a gang, with men holding iron forks and hatchets, and the woman and the child screamed and ran towards the old man's stone house. The fire became closer and closer, and the air was filled with a heavy smell of smoke, and bloody smell. Lin Yechen's heart tightened, and his hand holding the sword shook slightly, but he still ran towards the entrance of the village with his skin hard. When he arrived at the entrance of the village, the scene made him stunned. Several dozen soldiers in black armor were carrying torches, and blood was dripping from the long sword. Under his feet were the guards in several villages. His eyes widened, as if he was dying with his eyes open. There was a skeleton mark engraved on the soldiers' helmets. Although Lin Yechen had never seen it, he had heard that the old man said this was the mark of the Dark Empire. How could it be? Yi Shuanghua's voice was trembling. The frost in her hand had condensed into a thin barrier, but it looked so thin in front of these well-trained soldiers. A tall black-armored military officer walked out, carrying a long scar on his face, his eyes as cold as a poisonous snake. He glanced at the village, his voice was low and silenced. The evil of the star blood is hidden quite deep. It burned the village, and it won't leave anyone. Lin Yechen's brain buzzed. The blood of the stars? He had heard this, and the elder always avoided talking, but he knew it was related to him. He subconsciously took a step back, but he stepped on a stone under his feet, making a sound of crispness. The Scar Armyman's gaze instantly locked him, and a sneer came out from the corner of his mouth. "I found you, little boy." Yi Shuanghua reacted very quickly, and raised his hand and shot an ice arrow, heading straight to the military officer's face. But the other party just turned to a light side, and the ice arrows swept over his face and smashed on the ground into ice slag. The military officer snorted coldly and signaled to the soldiers behind him, "Catch them and don't let them run away." Lin Yechen gritted his teeth and felt a mess in his brain, but he knew that it was not the time to be in a daze. He grabbed Yi Shuanghua and shouted in a low voice, "Run! Run to the forest!" Yi Shuanghua pointed at the head, and the two turned around and rushed into the dense forest behind them. The soldiers behind him immediately chased after him, and the light of the torch swayed in the darkness, as if countless eyes were staring at them. Lin Yechen ran out of breath, and was knocked down by the tree roots from time to time, but he didn't dare to stop. He could feel that the soldiers' murder was like a knife, piercing his back at any time. "Yechen, there is a cave in front of you." Yi Shuanghua's voice came from the front, and there was a faint blue light between her palms, barely illuminating the way forward. Lin Yechen followed her into a narrow cave, and the two of them were standing in the air, and they didn't dare to come out. The sound of the outside was getting closer and closer, and the fire was shaking at the entrance of the cave, and Lin Yechen's heartbeat seemed to be about to explode. He looked down at his hand, and a starlight burst out from his palm inexplicably, like a firecracker, faintly dazzling. A thought suddenly flashed in his brain. Was this what they were looking for? Is this what is called the star blood? Have you found it? A rough sound came from outside the cave, followed by a few spells. There's no ghost in this broken place. How can I explain to my head when I go back? Look for it again, that kid can't run far. Another voice said coldly, his footsteps slowly moving away, but Lin Yechen knew that they might come back at any time. Yi Shuanghua leaned against the cave wall, her face turned white and her head was covered with cold sweat. She said in a low voice, "Yechen, I heard that we can't go back to the village. Since the people of the Dark Empire have come, they will not let you go. What they are looking for is your blood." Lin Yechen gritted his teeth and felt a little unwilling to accept it in his voice. "Why is it me? I didn't do anything. I don't even know what this blood-breaking pill is." Yi Shuanghua looked at him with a confused look, as if she wanted to say something, but in the end she closed her mouth. She just held his hand lightly and said in a low voice, "Don't be afraid, I'll be with you. We have to leave this and find a safe place, and then, figure it out." Lin Yechen clicked a little, but it seemed like a big stone was pressing down in his heart. He looked at the fire that was gradually getting darker outside the cave entrance, and his brain was full of familiar faces from the village, the old man next door, and even the old yellow dog who wrinkled his tail every day. Are they still alive? At this moment, a low smile suddenly came from outside the cave, as if it was coming out of the ground, making people creepy. Lin Yechen and Yi Shuanghua were shocked at the same time. Chi looked at the entrance of the cave and saw a hunched figure walking away slowly. He was covered with broken cloak, his face full of frost marks, and he had a deep and unpredictable smile. "Two little guys, you're hiding very well." The old man's voice was like sand rubbing, but there was no trace of evil in his language. He stopped, leaning on a twisted wooden stick, his eyes flashing in the dark, but the dog knows of the Dark Empire is not that easy to fool. Lin Yechen raised his eyebrows and held the handle tightly with his hands. "Who are you? Why do you help us?" The old man grinned and showed his yellow teeth. "Call me Yun Wang, as for why I help you. Hey, boy, the little starry blood on you is much more important than what you think. If you want to know the answer, don't waste your time and keep up." Yi Shuanghua looked at Lin Yechen with a few hesitations in his eyes, but in the end he was still a little bit. She said in a low voice, "Yechen, we don't have to choose. At least, he doesn't want to harm us now." Lin Yechen gritted his teeth and felt unwilling to do anything in his heart, but he knew that Yi Shuanghua was right. They are now like sheep falling into a wolf, and they are not qualified to pick 3 or 4. He stood up, patted the soil on his body, and said in a deep voice, "Okay, we'll go with you. But I warn you that if you play with flowers, my sword will not be too big." Yun Xiao laughed, as if he had heard a huge laugh. "Don't worry, boy, your broken sword can't be cut even with my beard. Let's go, there are more exciting things waiting for you in front." The 3 of them walked out of the cave, and the night wind was still biting, but an inexplicable flame ignited in Lin Yechen's heart. He didn't know who this old man was, nor did he know what was waiting for him, but he conceded that all of this just began. The night wind blew outside the cave, like countless ghosts in a whisper, making people's backs sway. Lin Yechen held the broken iron sword tightly, followed Yun Xiao, and his brain looked like a group of numbness. As soon as he escaped from the village, soldiers from the Dark Empire were still searching nearby. He and Yi Shuanghua had no time to think about it at all, so they could only follow this unknown old man who came forward with a hard head. The moonlight shone down through the sparse branches, reflecting the cloud's face that was full of patterns even more strange. He occasionally glanced at Lin Yechen, with a meaningful smile in his eyes, which made Lin Yechen's heart grow hair. "Old, where are we going?" Lin Yechen finally couldn't help but open his mouth, and there was a few impatient sounds in his voice. He stepped on the cold soil under his feet, and every step he took seemed to be trapped in a bigger slumber. Yun Wang didn't turn around, but leaned on the twisted wooden stick and said slowly, "What's the hurry, boy? The dog's nose of the Dark Empire is so strong. Now stop and chat. I guess you will become their sword beneath the sword tomorrow morning. If you want to survive, just shut up and follow." Lin Yechen gritted his teeth. Although he was unhappy, he didn't say anything more. He glanced at Yi Shuanghua beside her. Her face was still as white as she was, and there was a flash of blue light flashing between her palms, as if she was ready to face the sudden situation at any time. Her long robe was scratched by the branches, and her hair was a little irritating, but her eyes were still so cold that it made people feel at ease. Lin Yechen felt a little confused. He knew that Yi Shuanghua had been urging him hard, but he couldn't help. This feeling of powerlessness made his hand holding the sword tighter. The 3 walked silently through the forest, their steps covered by wind and occasional birds. The air deep in the forest is getting more and more damp, and you can still hear a rotten smell, which makes people feel sick. After about half a minute of walking, Yun Wang finally stopped walking. In front of him was a stone wall covered with vines. Some ancient carvings could be seen on the stone wall, like some runes, or the descent of a lost civilization. It's here, Yun said in a low voice, with a burst of fatigue in the sound. He stretched out his dry hand, pressed it lightly on the stone wall, and recited a few mantras that he couldn't understand in his mouth. With his voice, the vines on the stone wall seemed to be alive, slowly retreating, revealing a narrow passage, which was pitch black, like an entrance to the ground. Lin Yechen raised his eyebrows and took a step back. What's this place? You don't want to sell us, right? Yun hummed, turned to look at him, his eyes filled with disdain. Selling you? Boy, you are not worth a few copper plates. This place is the old sect of the Star Empire, or refuge 100 years ago, and people from the Dark Empire cannot enter. If you want to survive, don't waste your time, go in. Yi Shuanghua looked down at the passage, and saw a flash of hesitation in his eyes, but soon became cold again. She said to Lin Yechen lightly, Yechen, we don't have to choose. If the soldiers outside find us, we don't have the chance to escape. Go in, at least, hide first. Lin Yechen gritted his teeth and was reluctant to do anything in his heart, but he also knew that it was not the time to be willful. He clicked his head, held the iron blade tightly, and followed Yunwang into the passage. Yi Shuanghua walked at the end, and the blue light in his palm lit up slightly, as if he was ready to face possible dangers at any time. The air in the passage was even more humid and had an indescribable smell. The wall was covered with moss, and some gravel could be stepped on under the feet, making a crisp sound. Yun Lu walked in front, and a faint light lit up at the top of the wooden stick in his hand, barely illuminating the way forward. Lin Yechen looked down at his feet, thinking about what happened in the village just now. Those black-armored soldiers, those familiar faces, and the star blood mentioned by the Scar army. All of this was like a nightmare, but he knew clearly that this was true. After walking for about a minute, a huge underground stone hall appeared in the passage. There was an old stone platform in the center of the stone hall, full of complex runes, and some raw weapons and broken armor were scattered around it, as if there had been a fierce battle. There are also some blurry wall paintings on the wall of the stone hall, painting a group of people carrying weapons condensed by starlight to fight against some huge dark creature. This is... Yi Shuanghua was shocked, with a shock in his eyes. She walked to the stone platform and gently touched the runes on it, as if she could feel some long-lasting breath. Yun leaned against the wall, gasping for breath, and said in a sandy manner, "This is one of the last refuges of the Star Empire. 100 years ago, they resisted the Dark Empire here, but unfortunately, they still failed." He paused for a moment, his eyes becoming a little complicated. However, there are still some old things hidden here, which may be useful to you. Lin Yechen stood with his eyebrows, walked to the stone platform, and looked down at the runes. Although he didn't know these runes, he didn't know why, and there was an inexplicable throbbing in his heart, as if these things were summoning him. He subconsciously stretched out his hand, his palm resting on the stone platform. In an instant, a warm air flowed from the stone platform to the palm of his palm, and then his whole body, as if a fire was burning in his body. Yechen. Yi Shuanghua was shocked and hurriedly grabbed his hand, but when her hand touched Lin Yechen, it was blown open by an invisible force. She stumbled back a few steps, her face turned paler and her eyes were filled with worry. Lin Yechen gritted his teeth, and there seemed to be countless sounds in his brain, and some blurry pictures flashed in front of him: the starry sky, countless people carrying weapons, and a huge dark figure seemed to be able to swallow everything. He suddenly pulled his hand back and fell to the ground, gasping for breath, and his head was covered in cold sweat. Yun looked at him, and a satisfied light flashed in his eyes. "No, boy, your blood is more pure than I thought. This stone platform is the test platform of the Star Empire, which can awaken the power of blood. But, you are too weak now, and you are reluctant to contact, and you will only make yourself half dead." Lin Yechen gritted his teeth, and there was a little unwillingness in his voice. "What blood force? I don't know what you are talking about. Why is it me? Why is the Dark Empire going to chase me?" Yun Shao grinned and showed yellow teeth. "Why? Because you are the last hope of the Star Empire and the greatest threat of the Dark Empire. Your blood can awaken the Star Core, which can change the entire continent. Of course, they won't let you live." "Star Core?" Yi Shuanghua raised his eyebrows, with a little doubt in his voice. What is that? Yun turned his head and looked at her, with a complex light flashing in his eyes. The star core is the core of the Star Empire and the source of all the blood of the stars. 100 years ago, the Dark Empire took it away and sealed it in their forbidden land. The magic of the mainland was weakened as a result, and ordinary people became slaves. If you want to change all of this, you have to find the star core and awaken its power. Lin Yechen was stunned for a moment. His brain was full of doubts. Retrieve the star core? Just complain about us? Boss, are you corrupt? We can't even save the village, so why do you want to change the land? Yun shook a sound and knocked on the wooden stick. Boy, don't underestimate yourself. The star core is not something that anyone can wake up. Only your pure and honest star blood vessels are qualified. However, you are really too weak now and you can't control your own power, let alone fight against the Dark Empire. So, you have to pass the test first and truly master the power of the blood vessels. Try it. Lin Yechen raised his eyebrows, and he felt a bad feeling in his heart. Yunlu clicked the head and pointed to a small door on the side of the stone hall. There is a place to try and experience it is left by the Star Empire for future generations. If you pass, you will be able to grasp the power of blood. If you can't pass, oh, then you can only blame you for your bad luck. When Yi Shuanghua heard this, her face changed and she hurriedly said, No. Yechen just touched the stone platform and has not recovered at all now. How can she try it? Lao, what is your purpose? Yun looked at her, with a few meaningful points in his eyes. Little girl, my purpose is very simple, to let this kid survive and then complete what he should do. As for the trial, it is better to go early than to go late. People from the Dark Empire will not wait for you to prepare before killing others. Lin Yechen bit his teeth tightly and his heart was hurt. He knew that Yun Wang had a reasonable point, but he also knew that this trial was probably not a simple matter. He looked down at his hand, and there was a sense of warmth left in his palm when he just touched the stone platform, as if there was a force resting on it. He took a deep breath, raised his head, and said in a deep voice, Okay, I'll try it. But old man, I warn you that if this is a pit, I will even pull you on the back even if I die. Yun Xiao laughed, as if he had heard a huge joke. Don't worry, boy, I'm not working yet. Go, this little girl and I are waiting for you outside. Yi Shuanghua wanted to say something, but Lin Yechen had already stood up and walked towards the small door. He knew that Yi Shuanghua was worried about him, but he also knew that some things could not be avoided. He pushed open the door, and there was a narrow corridor inside, and he could see a glimmer of light at the end. He held the iron sword tightly and walked in without looking back. The air in the corridor was even more stressful, and the walls were filled with ancient runes. With every step, Lin Yechen could feel an invisible pressure coming towards him, as if someone was secretly igniting him. When I walked to the front, there was a circular stone chamber in front of me, with a group of starlight floating in the center, like small stars, emitting soft and dazzling light. This is... Lin Yechen murmured softly, with a little shock in his eyes. He subconsciously walked a few steps, but at this moment, the starlight suddenly burst out with a strong light, and then a low voice echoed in his brain, Descendants of the blood of the star, accept the test. Prove your qualifications or be buried here. As the voice fell, the ground in the stone chamber suddenly shook, and countless starlight condensed into a huge wolf-shaped creature, with agri light flashing in her eyes and swept towards Lin Yechen. Lin Yechen felt nervous and quickly lifted the iron sword grid, but the wolf-shaped creature was shockingly fast, and his claws directly slapped his sword, making a harsh sound of metal collision. Don't die! Lin Yechen bit his teeth tightly, and was shocked to retreat a few times, his arms numb. He knew that this thing was not something he could resist, but he had no place to escape. He took a deep breath and suddenly flashed through his brain when he just touched the stone platform. The warm power seemed to be able to transform into a certain weapon. He closed his eyes and tried to recall the feeling. A starlight burst out from his palm. Although it was weak, it made a burst of hope ignite in his heart. He suddenly opened his eyes and raised his hand. The starlight condensed into a short blade in his palm. Although it was unstable, it emitted a faint light. Come on. He growled, holding the starlight blade to face the wolf-shaped creature. The short blade collided with the wolf's claws, making a crisp sound. Although it could not hurt the other side, it also made its attack a little. Lin Yechen took advantage of the opportunity to slam the other side, avoided the next strike, and then quickly stood up to find the opportunity for the next attack. The battle in the stone chamber lasted for a full moment, and Lin Yechen was covered in scars and panting, but the wolf-shaped creature seemed to be exhausted, and his attacks were more and more fierce every time. He knew that if he continued like this, he would have fallen down long ago, but there was a dissatisfied head in his heart supporting him. He gritted his teeth and his brain was covered with burnt images of the village, and his white face. He can't fall, at least, he can't fall here. At this moment, the wolf-shaped creature suddenly let out a low growl, its body doubled, and the light on its claws became even more dazzling. Lin Yechen's heart sank, knowing that this was the last blow. He held the starlight short blade tightly, closed his eyes, and tried to concentrate all his strength on this blow. The starlight short blade suddenly burst out with a strong light, like a real star falling, stabbing at the wolf-shaped creature with an unparalleled atmosphere. Room! There was a huge sound, and the light in the stone chamber swallowed everything in an instant. Lin Yechen only felt a huge force coming, and then the whole person was thrown to the ground, and his mind blurred. At the same time, Yi Shuanghua and Yun outside the stone hall heard the tranquility in the stone chamber, and the faces of both of them changed. Yi Shuanghua suddenly stood up and wanted to rush in, but was caught by Yin Wang. "Little girl, don't come. It's his fate to try it, and no one can help him." Yi Shuanghua bit his teeth tightly, his eyes filled with anxiety. But what if something happens to him? "Are you watching?" Yun was silent for a while, and a complex light flashed in his eyes. "If he can't even pass here, then he is not the person I'm looking for." Yi Shuanghua wanted to say something, but at this moment, a faint starlight suddenly appeared in the direction of the stone chamber, as if some kind of force had been awakened. Her heart tightened, her eyes fixed on that direction, and her hands clenched the corners of her clothes unconsciously. The starlight spread smoothly from the direction of the stone chamber, like a meteor falling in the night sky, faintly carrying a kind of warmth that is difficult to describe. Yi Shuanghua stood in the stone hall, holding the corner of her clothes tightly with both hands, her eyes full of anxiety and expectation. Yun Wang beside him leaned against the wall, and his face was still full of profound and unpredictable expression, but his fingers knocked on the wooden stick, as if covering up the anxiety in his heart. The silence in the stone chamber had stopped, and there was only a dead silence left in the air, which made people feel nervous. Finally, the small door in the stone chamber was pushed open with a squeak, and Lin Yechen's figure walked out in a stumble. His clothes were torn like beggars, covered in mud and blood, his face as white as a piece of paper, but his eyes were so lit that it seemed like a burning spark hidden. He was still holding the short blade condensed by starlight in his hand. Although the light had dimmed, it still emitted a faint wave. "Yechen!" Yi Shuanghua exclaimed in surprise, and hurriedly rushed over and supported his body that was about to slap. Her hands were shaking slightly, and there was a slight light in her eyes, but she quickly pressed down again. Are you okay?" Lin Yechen smiled hard, and his voice seemed to be worn by sandpaper. "I can't die. I'm just a little tired." He lowered his head and glanced at the starlight blade in his hand, and a complex look flashed in his eyes. "This thing seems to really have something to do with me." Yun, who hummed, walked over, looked at Lin Yechen up and down, as if looking at a strange object. "It's good, boy, my life is very strong." After passing the test, the blood force also woke up initially. However, this just started, and the road ahead was not so simple. Lin Yechen raised his head and glared at him, with a few unhappiness in his voice. "Old, just say nothing. I've tried it. Now you should tell me what to do next." Yun Shao grinned and showed a mouthful of yellow teeth. "What's the hurry? Since the blood force woke up, we have to start the main business, find the star core. The first step is to gather 3 pieces of star fragments. Without this thing, you can't even touch the doors in the forbidden area." "Star fragments?" Yi Shuanghua raised her eyebrows, with a little doubt in her voice. "What is that? Where is it?" Yun turned his head and looked at her, with a scattered light flashing in his eyes. The star fragments are the keys of the star core. They were scattered and hidden in the vast land by the remaining forces of the Star Empire 100 years ago. I know the whereabouts of the first fragment, just in the Frost Island Valley in the north. However, that place is not a good place to go. The demons are traveling, and the patrol teams of the Dark Empire are guarding. If you want to get the fragments, you have to prepare hard. Lin Yechen gritted his teeth and felt a little scared, but he knew that it was not the time to retreat. He said in a low voice, "Okay, the Frost Island Valley is the Frost Island Valley. It's better to stay here and wait for death." Yi Shuanghua pointed a little, and although her face was still a little white, she had a little more determination in her eyes. "I'll go with you. Yechen, your blood power is still unstable, and someone will help you on the way." Yunlu glanced at her and said nothing, but just knocked on the wooden stick. "That's settled. Take a night off and set off tomorrow morning. The road to Frost Island Valley is far away, and there is no time for you to be on the road." The night was getting deeper, and a pile of faint bonfires were lit in the stone hall, and the flames reflected the shadows of the three of them to sway. Lin Yechen sat down against the stone wall, holding the starlight blade in his hand, and his brain was full of pictures of trying to get into the clay. The wolf-shaped creature's ape-red eyes, as well as the blurry memory fragments in the sea of brain, made his heart feel like a stone was pressed down, heavy. He knew that his destiny had been with this star blood, but he didn't like this feeling at all. Yi Shuanghua sat next to him, a faint frost light circling in his palm, as if he was ready to face possible dangers at any time. Her eyes were a little confused, as if she wanted to say something, but in the end she closed her mouth and just said lightly, "Yechen, don't think too much. The road is still long, let's come step by step." Lin Yechen clicked the head, but didn't answer, but just looked down at the bonfire. The fire was pounding in his eyes, as if burning a certain determination. All night was gone, and early the next morning, the three of them packed their bags and left the underground shelter from another passage in the stone hall. The sky outside was still gray, and the cold wind shaved over the face like a knife, making people unable to help but shrink their necks. Yunlu walked in front, and the sound of the wooden stick hitting the ground reverberating in the empty mountains. Lin Yechen and Yi Shuanghua followed behind. Although their steps were a little heavy, who did not say a word of retreat. Frost Island is in the northern part of the Star Round, and it is half a month away from their current location. Along the way, they passed through the deserted ruins and dense forests, and were still hiding from the patrol teams of the Dark Empire from time to time. Although Lin Yechen's blood power was initially awakened, he still couldn't control it far away, and occasionally he would lose control in the battle, causing himself and Yi Shuanghua to fall into danger. Yi Shuanghua's frost magic became more and more mature, but her face was getting worse day by day, as if she was being pressed by something, which made Lin Yechen feel a little uneasy. Half a month later, they finally arrived at the entrance to the Frost Island Valley. This place is indeed unfair. On both sides of the valley are ice walls that are filled with high roars. The snow and snow blow from the depths of the valley, as if countless ghosts are wailing. The air is so cold that it can suck people's ears, and the snow under the feet is so thick that it can be beyond the knees. Every step it takes is like fighting life. The fragments are in an ice cave deep in the ice valley. Yunshu stopped and his voice was blurred by the wind and snow. However, there is a giant frost wolf guarding that place, and its strength is no worse than the one you encountered when you tried to get it. Also, the patrol teams of the Dark Empire may also sway nearby, so you have to be careful. Lin Yechen gritted his teeth and held the iron sword tightly around his waist. Although the sword had been broken long ago, he still held it habitually, as if he could give himself a sense of security. He said in a low voice, "I understand. Let's go. Don't delay time." Yi Frost drew a little, and the frost light in the palm of his hand lit up, as if he was ready to face sudden development at any time. Her long robe was floating in the snow, her face was as white as the snow itself, but her eyes were so dazed that people dared not look directly. The three of them walked towards the deep valley with the snow on their feet. The squeaking sounds of the snow on their feet kept coming, as if they would collapse at any time. After about half a minute of walking, a huge ice cave appeared far away. The entrance was surrounded by icicles, and you could see a faint blue light inside, like some kind of treasure emitting breath. "That's it," Yun Lu said in a low voice, with a bit of solemnity in his voice. "Be careful, that giant wolf is not easy to mess with." As the voice fell, a low growl suddenly came from the depths of the ice cave, like a thunderbolt underground, shaking the surrounding ice walls trembled slightly. Then, a huge white giant wolf walked out of the ice cave. Its hair was covered with frost, and its eyes were filled with red light, as if it could see through a human soul. Its figure was even bigger than the wolf that Lin Yechen encountered when he tried to get into the trap. Every time he took a step, the ground shook. "Don't die," Lin Yechen whispered, held the iron sword tightly, and the starlight began to condense in his palm. He knew that this battle was even more dangerous than the war, but he knew that the current regression would only make them completely defeated. Yi Xuanhua bit his teeth tightly, and the frost light in his palm instantly swelled, turning into ice arrows and shooting at the giant wolf. However, when those ice arrows touched the giant wolf's hair, they were directly shattered by a layer of frost breath, leaving no traces left. Her face turned paler and she was sweating coldly on her head, but she was still standing firmly. "Don't come on!" Yun Wang shouted softly, and the wooden stick hit the ground suddenly, and an invisible wave of light spread out from him, barely squeezing the giant wolf's snatch. "Boy, your blood power is the key. Don't be stunned, find a chance to attack its eyes." Lin Yechen clicked a little, took a deep breath, and the starlight short blade in his palm condensed and formed again. Although the light was still unstable, it was much stronger than before. He looked at the gap between the giant wolf's beating, and suddenly turned over and slammed it, avoiding the attack of his claws, then jumped up quickly, pointing the short blade straight to the giant wolf's left eye. "Ayo!" The giant wolf let out a painful roar, and his left eye was stabbed by a short blade, and the blood mixed with frost flowed down, but its attack became even more crazy, and his claws were directly slapped at Lin Yechen with wind snow. Lin Yechen couldn't hide, but was slapped hard and hit the ice wall. A mouthful of blood was sprayed out of his mouth, almost passing by. "Yechen!" Yi Xuanhua exclaimed with surprise and hurriedly rushed over. The frost in her palm condensed into a barrier, pressing against Lin Yechen, but her power was almost at its limit, and cracks began to appear when the barrier was formed. Yin bit his teeth tightly, and a strong light lit up from the wooden stick, as if some ancient magic was moaning, "Little girl, hold it down." "I'll hold it up, boy, recover tightly, don't waste any chance." Lin Yechen gritted his teeth and stood up with great force, his brain full of dizziness, but he knew that it was not the time to fall. He looked down at the starlight blade in his palm, and his eyes flashed with a flash of determination. He took a deep breath and tried to concentrate all his strength on the short blade. The light instantly stormed, like a real star falling. "Go to die!" He growled, and the whole person was like a shattered arrow, thrusting towards the giant wolf, and the short blade led to the other eye with an unparalleled air. This time, the giant wolf finally let out a slight wail, and his body stumbled back a few steps, then fell down, shaking the ground. Lin Yechen had no strength when he landed on the ground and knelt directly on the ground, gasping heavily. Yi Xuanhua hurriedly supported him, his face worse than his, but his eyes were filled with relief. You did it." Yun Xiang left and hummed, "Hard to be over. But don't be too early, and the fragments have not been obtained yet." The three of them took a break and walked into the depths of the ice cave. The blue light in the cave became brighter and brighter. Finally, on an ice platform at the deepest point, they saw a crystal as big as a fist, emitting faint starlight, as if some ancient force was sleeping. "This is the fragment of the stars." Lin Yechen murmured softly and reached for it, but at this moment, a rapid stomp sound suddenly came from outside the ice cave, followed by a rough sound. "Finish them." "Here!" Lin Yechen felt nervous and turned around and saw a group of soldiers in black armor blocking the entrance of the ice cave. The head was a man with a burly figure and a scar on his face, with his eyes as cold as a poisonous snake. He glanced at Lin Yechen and the other two, and sneered out of the corner of his mouth, "The little boy with Xingchen's blood runs quite far away." However, the game ends here. Yun Wang raised his eyebrows and said in a low voice, "It's Harry Haotian, a rebel. But, judging from the way he got hooked up with the Dark Empire." Lin Yechen bit his teeth tightly, held the stars in his hand tightly, and his brain was full of chaos. He knew that this battle was probably more fierce than the just giant wolf. But he also knew that the retreat now would only make them completely defeated. He took a deep breath, stood up, and said in a low voice, "Frost Hua, old man, be prepared. Let's fight." Yi Shuang drew a little, and the frost light in her palm lit up again. Although her face was already scary, there was no trace of her eyes. Yun Xiang hummed, and a light lit up from the wooden stick. "Boy, don't drag your back legs. I can't afford this battle." Shi Haotian sneered and slapped his hand. The black-armored soldier behind him immediately rushed over. The sword light and shadow flashed in the ice cave, and the battle started as soon as it touched. Lin Yechen held the stars tightly, and a thought suddenly flashed through his brain: this fragment may help them get sleepy. He closed his eyes and tried to inject blood into pieces. In an instant, a strong starlight burst out from the pieces, like a small sun, illuminating the entire ice cave. "What?" Shi Haotian's face changed and he hurriedly retreated, but the starlight could no longer swallow the soldiers in front of him. Before he could even scream, he turned into a pile of dust. Lin Yechen opened his eyes quietly, with a shock in his eyes. He never expected that the power of this fragment would be so powerful. "Let's go!" Yun shouted softly, and took advantage of the blank space where Zi Haotian was stunned and drove Lin Yechen and Yi Shuanghua out of the ice cave. The soldiers behind him quickly responded, and the chasing footsteps reverberated in the snow, but the three of them had disappeared into the vast snow. After a few hours, they finally left the pursuers and hid into a hidden cave. Lin Yechen leaned against the cave wall, gasping heavily, holding the fragments of stars in his hand, his eyes full of complexion. Yi Shuanghua sat next to him, her face worse than before, as if she would fall down at any time, but she still smiled fiercely. "The first piece. I got it." Yun Lu clicked a little, and there was a bit of solemnity in his voice. "It's good, but this is just the beginning. There are 2 fragments waiting for you to get them. Moreover, the appearance of Zi Haotian shows that the Dark Empire has been watching us. The next road will only be more difficult." Lin Yechen bit his teeth tightly and looked down at the fragments in his hand. The starlight was beating in his palm, like a call. He knew that Yun said it right, and this road just began. But he also knew that no matter what was ahead, he had to go on for the village, for Yi Shuanghua, and to figure out who he was. The wind and snow outside the cave were still yelling, as if countless sounds were in the low language, indicating that a more dangerous challenge was coming. Lin Yechen raised his head and looked at the darkness far away. A faint and fixed light ignited in his eyes.